Lupus LA would like to thank our generous sponsors for their support of the Your Story, Our Fight podcast. Gemini Beauty believes in beauty for a cause, and in their case, the cause is lupus. The team at Gemini is changing the skincare game for good. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Lupus LA podcast, Your Story, Our Fight. I'm your host, Adam Selkowitz, and joining me today is holistic nutritionist, fitness coach, and lupus advocate, Genny Mack. And I love saying her name, Genny Mack. I think it's the coolest name. So welcome to the podcast, Genny. We're going to talk about a lot of cool things today, and not the least of which is foraging, right?
Oh,
we're going to get to foraging. That was a very interesting part of your story. But how are you today?
I'm doing very well today. Thanks for asking, Adam. How are you?
I'm doing all right, thanks. I'm hanging in. I'm cold today. I brought out the hoodie. So for LA, it's freezing. So tell me a little bit about your lupus story. Give me kind of the history of when you were diagnosed and really a little bit about what you were doing before you were diagnosed.
I was diagnosed with lupus in 2017 after years of questioning. My mother has lupus, so there was an indication that I might have lupus. I had the signs in terms of my blood work, my antibody markers, but I wasn't officially diagnosed until 2017 when I had pneumonia. Essentially, I got my tooth extracted, my wisdom teeth extracted, and I was put on a course of antibiotics. And I just sort of flared after that. And my journey with lupus has been a journey indeed. I used to work in corporate America. I had a very successful career working in public accounting. I made it up the rank, I made it up the ladder, and I did a lot of traveling for work. And I had a lot of stressors just working in that very demanding career. So I'm sure
and that was all pre-diagnosis, right?
Yeah, that was pre-diagnosis. So I'm sure.
And how old were you when you were diagnosed?
I was 30 years old.
30 years old. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm sure that the work stressors was a contributing factor to my lupus diagnosis. And it really spiraled after that. After going on a corporate trip, I did a trip to India, and I was based there for a couple of months. And just being so close to the equator, right? Having the heat from the sun, the UV rays, and just being in a different climate really exacerbated my lupus condition. So I came back to America. I had to leave my work assignment early, and I was hospitalized. And I was also diagnosed with lupus nephritis between class 4 and class 5. And that's really when my lupus journey started from there.
So when you went to India, you hadn't any lupus diagnosis before that. So the flare kind of occurred while you were overseas.
Exactly.
And then did you see any doctors in India or was all of the diagnosis stuff done here?
I did see doctors in India. I actually was in a good place to see some really world-class doctors, and they confirmed my symptoms of lupus. So I was diagnosed before my trip to India, but I wasn't experiencing severe symptoms until I was out of my comfort zone. And the India doctors, I saw about 7 doctors in India, and each of them told me that I need to go home to really treat my condition, to be in a safe space. So again, I left my work assignment early, and I came back and I just started drastically losing weight. I couldn't hold down food. I started to become malnourished. My joints were inflamed. I had all of those lupus symptoms that one could imagine. And I was hospitalized for about a month. So it required a lot of medication to stabilize my condition. It was very scary.
Tell me where your family was at this point.
Yeah. So my family, so coming back from India, I used to live in New York at this point, but I decided to move home with my mother to really help stabilize my condition. So my mother was around. And I also had my sister who came to save the day. My work actually flew out my sister to help bring me home and to make sure that I got home safe. So my family,
Where's home?
yeah, my family's home is from Philadelphia. It's a
Got
little
it.
complicated though, because I was born in El Paso, Texas. I'm a family with the military, so we grew up on the military base, and I live in New York right now, and I've lived in New York for most of my adult life.
Tell me a little bit about, you said your mom had lupus. Tell me a little bit about, we're seeing a lot. I'm actually interviewing next week a mother-daughter, I
Mm.
think my second or third mother-daughter with lupus, both with lupus. And um, I find that very interesting. When you were growing up, was lupus a big part of your childhood in terms of her diagnosis?
Adam, this is a very profound question for me because lupus, we heard about lupus in my family, but it wasn't something that we talked about. And I think it's because it's a generational thing. My mom and her ancestors were always told to be tough, to stay tough. So I knew my mom has lupus or had lupus at the time of growing up, but I didn't know much about it. She
Hmm.
essentially hid it very well. She always worked. She raised 5 children. She was a single mother. So for her, it was always about, just staying strong and working through it. Up until the point of in her early 50s, my mother had a heart attack. She
Mm.
had to get a quintuple um, past
Wow.
surgery, essentially. So that really highlighted the severity of lupus in my family. But up until then, it wasn't something that we talked about.
Do any of your siblings have autoimmune illnesses at this point?
Yeah, so at this point, I with outside of I of my mother of 5 children, right? So I have five. There's 5 of us. I'm the only one that has been officially diagnosed with lupus. I have a sister who's still going through the diagnosis journey. She does have some markers, but I'm the only one that officially has SLE.
Hmm. And how did are you guys, was it sort of a close, sounds like everybody sort of came to your aid when you were first diagnosed. And how did you think that made an impact in your recovery?
That's right. Yeah. So my mom has always been supportive. She essentially feels guilty that I have to have this disease, So she's been extremely supportive. My siblings have been very supportive. I've had different severe episodes. I'm actually just recovering from another severe lupus flare. So my family has always been around and supportive. And I would also say that I'm fortunate to have a partner, my husband, who's also been very supportive with lupus. So yeah, I am a lucky one because I also know that, there are individuals that don't feel like they have a support system, right, within their
Yep.
family or their friend network. So I am fortunate in that respect.
And I understand your mother's guilt because I have the same guilt with my daughter. So, but I feel like it's less of guilt and more of responsibility.
Hmm.
So if that makes you feel better, I think it's not. I know it wasn't my fault that this happened, so it's not a guilt aspect. But since it comes from me, I feel a certain responsibility to make sure she's as taken care of as possible. Um, and so I assume that's where your mother was coming from also. So tell me a little bit about, were you married at the time you were diagnosed, or was your relationship post lupus diagnosis?
My relationship was in the journey of discovering lupus. So I met my now husband in 2015 when I was working in London, and I was diagnosed 2 years later, right? So we were in the thick of our honeymoon stage,
Hmm.
right? We were engaged. So this was a new journey for both of us. But prior to my diagnosis, as I mentioned, I had a very successful career in public accounting, but I was in my late 20s. I was having a good time. You know,
Right.
I really
Right.
enjoyed hanging out with my friends, traveling, and just, enjoying life essentially without worry. So
Hmm.
that was life before diagnosis.
And I know a lot of people with lupus, especially those who get diagnosed younger before they have a spouse or partner. What's that like going through the process and, you know, figuring out your relationship, and how much does the lupus play a part? I mean, obviously you sort of test the mettle of somebody, right? If they can go through that with you, but how did lupus affect your relationship in sort of those first few years?
Oh, you're asking such good questions, Adam, because I was featured in an article about my relationship with lupus. And the premise behind that is that it's tough. It's a tough journey because, on one regard, you're managing a chronic illness, and then in the other regard, you're managing a relationship. So it can be very tough at times, but I am very fortunate and blessed to have a collaborative partnership. And when I say collaborative, I mean, if I am going through a flare and just not feeling well, my husband understands. He gives me my
Hmm.
space, but at the same time, he's there to bring me a cup of tea, or
Hmm.
to bring me my medication. He goes with me to my doctor's visits. And now we're starting to actually think about the impossible, think about having those conversations about fertility, you know.
Hmm.
So it
Yep.
is it is a dichotomy. It's a very challenging relationship at sometimes in the sense of managing a chronic condition, but with communication, with patience, with care, we're making it work. And we're still going through our phases, right, of any relationship, but we really
Right.
have a strong connection and a strong bond.
Yeah. No, I would imagine. Being the partner it's tough, but it's you know my wife wins an award because she puts up with me, and not just my lupus, but the lupus stories of all the people I talk to, and all the work we do. So um, that's a very common word in our house, lupus. So which I think you're right. I think it's interesting compared to. I mean, my parents, when I was diagnosed, I was 16, so we talked about lupus a lot, but I can understand sort of that generational. Um, keeping things on a tighter lip,
Mm.
tighter basis. But I think this is sort of a really nice way, because I feel like patients are more successful when their families are part of their story.
Yes, I feel that way too. Mhm.
Hmm. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about your transition from the accounting world to the holistic um, nutritionist world, and we're going to talk foraging as I discussed. So
Okay.
we'll be right back after this message.
Lupus LA's fellowship program is an essential part of ensuring the training of future rheumatologists. The nation is experiencing a serious shortage of pediatric rheumatologists. Today, there are approximately 300,000 children diagnosed with rheumatic conditions in the United States, but only about 250 practicing pediatric rheumatologists to meet this tremendous need. Call 310-657-5667 or visit our website at lupusla.org to support the efforts of Lupus LA.
We are back on the Lupus LA podcast, Your Story, Our Fight, talking to Genny Mack. So we're going to make a transition from accounting to foraging. That's what we're going to do now in our next segment. So I know that doesn't. I never thought I would actually say that sentence. But so tell me, you get diagnosed. Unfortunately, your career has to be put, I guess, on hold, but
Mm.
or changed. So
Yeah.
what was that transition process like? What was going through that decision-making process like?
Yeah, it wasn't something that happened overnight, that's for sure. I will say it was definitely a transition. So at first, I took a short-term leave of absence to really figure out this health journey with lupus. And my work was very supportive of that. But as soon as I came back to work, the work stressors started again, right? As you can imagine, in a very demanding career. So at that point, I made a decision to move to a job that had a more flexible arrangement. So I went from working in public accounting, and then I went to this Fortune 500 company. So very still high demanding, but I was able to have a more 9 to 5 schedule, a more predictable schedule. And within that time, I gave myself enough space to start to study. And this is when I started to learn about holistic wellness. So I decided to study holistic nutrition with this accredited institute called AFPA. And then I became certified as a holistic nutritionist. So I was working full time, but I was studying on the side. And then on top of that, I would call it side hustling. I grew a very successful fitness business called Grills and Granola. And we reinvented what wellness looked and felt like for women of color. And we taught this signature class called Trap Aerobics. And we served and we grew the community to over 500 women virtually over the pandemic. So with all of that going on, right? Working full time, studying to be a holistic nutritionist, running a fitness business, it was time for me to give up this corporate America life. So luckily over the pandemic, because of the success of the fitness business, I gave up public accounting. I left the accounting world and it felt so rewarding and fulfilling. And it also helped me get to the place where I was at that part of my life, which was a place of remission. So I was actually in remission with lupus for about 2 years during the pandemic.
Do you get a sense of when you leave the accounting world, public accounting world, is there relief? Is there sort of this big exhale that comes?
Yes, exactly that. There was a big relief where it felt like those work stressors, right? The stress of being um, the only African American woman in a senior position in a room at most times. That stress really started to come off of my shoulders. And I felt like I was able to start to spread my wings in the midst of having this chronic condition, right? I started to figure it out. I started to really prioritize my own wellness. I started to gain and maintain meaningful connections with my family, with my friends. And yeah, I felt like I was thriving at that part of my life, even in the midst of the pandemic. So I was very fortunate in that way.
Do you think, I don't know how to phrase this correctly, but do you think you were holding on to the older career because you felt like you didn't want lupus to take it from you? And then was there a different sort of perspective after you actually made the transition?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And as I mentioned before, I'm pretty sure that work was a big contributing factor to developing lupus or to exposing lupus, right? Because we know that lupus can come from genetic predispositions, but your environment, right, can really trigger signs and flares within lupus. So work definitely played a major role at that part in my life to developing lupus. And yeah, just transitioning out of this very demanding world, right? I was able to relieve the anxieties in life, right? A lot of those triggers that I didn't even know about, you know? When I was in
Right.
my career at the thick of it, I didn't know that, the very thing that I showed up to every single day was actually causing me so much stress until I got out of it.
Yeah.
And
Makes sense.
yeah, and even with that, I still struggle with the word productivity because, I was just constantly on. I was constantly on, in the sense of always having to show up for someone else. So even when I think of productivity, it's a new word that I'm really trying to demystify right now in my life. What does it actually mean to be productive?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. And Do you put that same sort of pressure on your current businesses, or is it a different kind of love versus pressure versus,
Yeah, it's definitely a different kind of love now because I've gone through so much now. So for me, the most important part is to take care of myself. And I know that when I could fill my cup up, then I can be able to serve my community in a better way. So yeah, it's definitely come full circle at
Yeah.
this point in my life.
All right. So tell me a little bit about what is holistic nutrition. I know what nutrition is. What makes it holistic? What's the difference?
Yeah, so holistic nutrition or holistic wellness in general really prioritize the full body in its entirety, right? So it's not just a physical phenomenon, it's also mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual, and really trying to come to a place of wholeness, of oneness. So that means that in my day, right, I'm not just thinking about what I look like, right? Externally, I'm thinking about how I feel. I'm asking myself, how do I feel today? And really just trying to bring balance and serenity in my life. So, some principles of holistic nutrition or holistic wellness, we think about how our environment impacts the way that we feel, right? So, our lifestyle, right? How are we sleeping every day? How are we maintaining social connections? How are we reducing external stressors in our life, right? Family, work, career, all of those things are very important to bring harmony and balance in our lives.
Okay. We're going to talk foraging.
Hmm.
You live in New York City. Tell me about how you got into foraging, how you do it in New York City
Yeah.
or the surrounding areas. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah.
And
So
and how does it help your lupus? That's the other question.
yeah, yeah. So I'm very passionate about plant medicine in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because okay, I'll just make a big disclaimer here, right? So when I talk about plants or herbs or plant medicine, I'm talking about it from a natural standpoint, right? But I'm also acknowledging that I'm not a doctor and the conversations that I'm having right now are just from experiential purposes, right? So you always
Right.
should consult with your doctor before you embark on this journey. So
And
I'll set
you have a
the
very blended Western Eastern medicine approach, right?
Yes, that's right. And it's evolved over time because initially, when I first had my severe flare in 2018 after going to India, I went strictly Western medicine. I started to get into holistic wellness, and then that led me to remission. But then I was vegan for about 4 years. I got sick again after having COVID in 2000 early 2023 this year, right? So I was in the
Mm-hmm.
hospital, in and out of the hospital for 4.5 months. So life is really different for me. I have a different perspective now. I have an appreciation for Western medicine, right? I know the power that Western medicine has with helping people recover, but I also know the power of Eastern medicine. I know the power of traditions of our ancestors, right? So that's how I really got into foraging. I really started to search internally and think about how our ancestors healed, and that was through plant medicine. So foraging is very near and dear to my heart. I'm excited about foraging both plants and mushrooms, and there's just so many medicinal benefits from Mother Nature.
Right. So where do you go? Like, tell me when you say, all right, I'm going to go foraging, how does it happen?
Okay. So how did I get into foraging in the first place? Just sort of ended up through this holistic wellness journey. But I watched this documentary that I highly recommend for anyone to watch just to understand where mushrooms come from. And the documentary is called Fantastic Fungi. I'm not sure if you heard of it in
Okay. Yeah.
but it's a documentary that explores mushrooms. And they're talking about how mushrooms have been super powerful to reverse chronic illnesses and to just get people in a better whole
Mm-hmm.
space, right? Through
Right.
holistic living. So that's how I got into foraging. I went on this foraging trip with this individual that lives in New York. His name is Steven, and he's been foraging for about 50 years. Okay.
Wow.
He's been foraging for about 50 years, and he hosts these foraging tours between spring and winter. And after that, I was hooked. I was hooked. So yeah, so
So you
I,
go on it. You say, all right, today I'm going on a actual trip to go to a spot. Okay.
yeah. So
You're
how
not
do
just walking around Central Park grabbing okay. Yeah. I just want to make sure.
I do that, but
Okay.
it's been a long journey to get there, right? Because
Got it. You
with
can't
any,
just, everybody can't just pick up a mushroom and,
no,
right. I got it.
no, you really have to be very certain with what you're picking up. And that's
Mm-hmm.
for both plants and mushrooms. So I've joined a mycological society of New York City to really be certain about the mushrooms that I pick. I know a good maybe 20, 30 mushrooms that I'm very certain of. For example, turkey tail is one mushroom that has a lot of medicinal properties. There's a compound called beta glucans in it, and it actually
Mm-hmm.
helps modulate the immune system, which is so
Mm-hmm.
powerful. So turkey tail is one that I'm very confident about. And then you also have, for example, dandelion leaves that are just abundant and grow wild in nature. And dandelion is so, so powerful to help cleanse the blood. And it provides a really
Mm-hmm.
good source of antioxidants, chlorophyll, and it actually cleanses the blood. So when you actually start to explore the power of plants and mushrooms, it's pretty profound.
It sounds really cool. I'm super impressed with you. And, so tell me what's on tap for your future. Give me what are the next steps?
Yeah.
I'm not going to say productivity because I'm going to leave that out. But like, what is coming next from Genny Mack?
Yeah, what's coming next? And to be, transparent as I have been, I am in a big transition in my life right now. So, as I alluded to before, 2023 was a hard year. I essentially spent 4.5 months in and out of the hospital. And April is when I started to see some light. And if I fast forward to today, the end of November, I feel very strong in my body physically. I'm working on my emotional stability, right? Because I went through so much trauma this year. But essentially, what's next for me is to continue to share my story, firstly. And I really want to help people see that you don't have to pick a side, right? You don't have to feel like that your health is dependent upon the Western medicine world in its entirety. Although it's very powerful, we know that, right? It saves
Mm-hmm.
lives. But there's also this world that you can explore too with Eastern medicine that looks at traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic practices, or even just simple practices like earthing, putting your bare feet in the ground to help bring balance and peace in your life, right? So I want to help share my story. I want to show people that you can harmonize both Western and Eastern medicine, and you can be your best self through that, right? I'm working to be that. I'm working to share my story, and I'm excited about whatever this next phase is.
So are we. I want to thank you for sharing your story with us. We're going to share it with as many people as we can. And I think it's an incredible story. I love your balance. I love your perspective. And yeah, you just have a great light. And thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and just one more point, I do have an Instagram page now, and I do have a website. So you can find me at jennymack.com. But my Instagram page, I created a holistic wellness program called the Eat School, right? And the
Okay.
principles are about to educate, adopt, and transform through predominantly plant-based nutrition. So you can follow me there at the Eat School. And again, I'm just running with the tide in 2024. I'm excited because I'm going to continue to share my story, whether it's through conversations like this. Who knows? We'll see. But thank you, Adam.
I love it. I love it. Check out the Instagram, everybody. And thanks very much, Genny. We're looking forward to what's next.
Thank you so much, Adam.
On behalf of the entire team at Lupus LA, we thank you for joining the Your Story, Our Fight podcast. Please tune in, spread the word, and come back for more inspiring lupus stories. I'm your host, Adam Selkowitz, wishing you good health, and to always remember, your story is our fight.